There is a dangerous assumption we make whenever we hear an old R&B record. We hear the voice, we remember the face, and eventually, we convince ourselves that the person holding the microphone was the group. But R&B history tells a much stranger story, because some of the most successful groups in soul music survived losing the very singers audiences thought were irreplaceable. Some were fired, some walked away. Some were replaced by singers nobody had heard of. And in a few extraordinary cases, the group didn't simply survive, it got bigger. That's the part worth examining, because maybe the greatest trick these groups ever pulled was convincing us that the star was standing at the front, when in reality, the real star might have been the songwriter sitting in the back, the producer in the control room, the musicians creating the groove, the members writing the harmonies, or simply the chemistry of the group itself. And once you start looking at R&B this way, familiar records suddenly sound different. You start asking questions. Who actually wrote this? Who created the sound? Who was carrying the group before the famous singer arrived? And most importantly, what happened when that supposedly irreplaceable voice disappeared? Today, we're going inside 10 R&B groups where the person everyone thought was the star wasn't necessarily the person holding the whole thing together. And number one may be the strongest proof of all, because this group changed lead singers and somehow kept making hit records. Let's begin. Number 10, The Temptations. David Ruffin's voice became inseparable from The Temptations. That gravelly emotional delivery helped make My Girl one of Motown's defining records, and for many fans, Ruffin was the voice they pictured when they thought of the group. But The Temptations were never built around one singer. Behind Ruffin were multiple lead voices, 5-part harmonies, unforgettable choreography, and a production team constantly pushing the group forward. By 1968, tensions between Ruffin and the group had become too serious to ignore. He wanted greater individual recognition, while the rest of the Temptations wanted to remain a unified group. Eventually, Ruffin was fired. Dennis Edwards stepped in, and instead of trying to recreate the old Temptations, producer Norman Whitfield helped create an entirely new sound. The group moved into psychedelic soul, Cloud 9, Ball of Confusion, Psychedelic Shack, and eventually, Papa was a Rolling Stone. Suddenly, the group that had been known primarily for romantic soul was tackling darker, more socially conscious material. Ruffin had been a major star, but the Temptations discovered something important after he left. The group itself was bigger than any one voice. Sometimes losing a singer doesn't destroy a group. It reveals what the group was capable of becoming all along. Number 9, Shalamar. Shalamar was never built around just one star. The classic lineup had 3 very different personalities. Howard Hewitt had the powerful voice, Jeffrey Daniel brought the unforgettable dancing, and Jody Watley had the charisma and presence that made her impossible to overlook. Together, they became one of the most recognizable R&B acts of the early 1980s. But behind the glamorous performances, serious problems were developing. Money, royalties, and disagreements over how the group was being managed created tension. Eventually, Watley and Daniel decided to leave. Suddenly, Shalamar had lost 2 of its 3 most recognizable members. For most groups, that could have been the end. But Shalamar continued with Hewitt and new members, proving that the name still had value beyond the original lineup. The new version eventually produced Dancing in the Sheets, which appeared on the Footloose soundtrack and became another major crossover moment for the group. But the bigger twist was happening outside Shalamar. Jody Watley went on to build a successful solo career and eventually won the Grammy for Best New Artist. So who was the real star? Howard Hewitt? Jody Watley? Jeffrey Daniel? The truth is, Shalamar may have contained 3 stars at once. Each member brought something the others couldn't completely replace, and once they separated, they proved that their individual talent had been much bigger than many people realized. Shalamar didn't create just one superstar. It temporarily brought 3 of them together. Number 8. The Dramatics. Few soul songs are as instantly recognizable as In the Rain. That haunting atmosphere, the sound of the storm, and that unforgettable falsetto floating over the melody. But the story behind that voice is more complicated than most listeners realize. William "Weegie" Howard was one of the important voices of the early Dramatics, while Ron Banks was another major personality within the group. For a time, their contrasting voices helped give the Dramatics their distinctive sound. But behind the scenes, tensions were growing over leadership, creative direction, and who would take the group's most important leads. Eventually, Howard left. And here's where the story gets interesting. The Dramatics didn't disappear. They brought in new talent, including L.J. Reynolds, and continued building their legacy with a different vocal identity. That's what makes the Dramatics such an interesting example. The voice you remember from one of their biggest records wasn't necessarily the voice that defined everything that came afterward. The group had something deeper holding it together. The harmonies, arrangements, musicians, songwriting, production, and chemistry between the members. The singer mattered, but the group was bigger than the singer. And that distinction is easy to miss when one voice becomes attached to one legendary song. Sometimes, we remember the person standing at the microphone when the real magic was happening all around him. Quick question, have you subscribed yet? If you're enjoying this countdown and love discovering the stories behind classic R&B and soul music, I'd really appreciate your support. I know it's easy to keep watching and forget to subscribe, but that one click makes a huge difference. It helps this channel grow and allows me to keep creating more documentaries like this for you. So, if you haven't subscribed yet, please take just a second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It truly means a lot, and I'd be incredibly grateful. Thank you. Now, let's get back to the countdown. Number 7. Atlantic Starr. If you know Atlantic Starr mainly from Always, you might assume that the woman singing it was the voice that built the group from the beginning. She wasn't. Sharon Bryant was part of Atlantic Starr's original lineup and played an important role in the group's early identity. Her voice helped establish the sound audiences first came to know, but in 1984, Bryant left. And suddenly, Atlantic Starr had to rebuild. The group brought in Barbara Weathers, and the change turned out to be far more important than anyone could have expected. With Weathers on lead, Atlantic Starr entered a new commercial era. First came Secret Lovers. Then came the song that changed everything, Always. But you can't be sure on. The record became a #1 hit on both the pop and R&B charts and eventually became one of the most recognizable slow dance songs of the 1980s. But here's what makes the story more interesting. It must have been sent from up above. It wasn't simply a case of one singer replacing another. The Lewis brothers remained central to Atlantic Starr's songwriting and musical direction. The new voice, the new material, and the band's existing musical foundation all came together at exactly the right moment. And suddenly, the group was bigger than it had ever been. I can't find enough ways to let you know. That's an important distinction. Barbara Weathers didn't single-handedly create Atlantic Starr's success. She became the voice of a new chapter that the entire group helped build. And there's an even bigger lesson here. The singer audiences see isn't always the person controlling the direction of the music. Sometimes the real engine is behind the microphone, writing the songs, shaping the arrangements, and deciding what that voice is going to sing. Atlantic Starr didn't simply replace Sharon Bryant. They discovered that the same group could sound completely different and become even more successful in the process. Number 6, the Manhattans.
Please don't stop me.
Few R&B breakup songs have ever been as instantly recognizable as Kiss and Say Goodbye.
I called you here today for a bit of bad news.
The opening spoken words, the slow, almost cinematic arrangement, and then Gerald Alston's smooth, emotional voice delivering one of the most memorable goodbyes in soul music. The song became a massive hit in 1976, reaching #1 on both the pop and R&B charts. But here's the part most people don't know. Gerald Alston didn't write it. The man behind the song was Winfred "Blue" Lovett, the Manhattans' bass singer.
And the ties that you have.
Lovett wrote the song and also delivered the famous spoken introduction. In other words, the person who created the emotional blueprint wasn't the person whose singing voice became most closely associated with the record. And that's where things get interesting.
We've been meeting here so long.
Alston's performance was essential. Without that voice, Kiss and Say Goodbye wouldn't have sounded the same. But Lovett created the story. He created the melody. He created the words. And Alston brought that story to life. It's one of the oldest contradictions in popular music. The writer creates the memory, the singer becomes the memory. And Lovett wasn't the only person whose contribution could disappear behind the spotlight. The Manhattans had spent years developing their sound through multiple voices and personalities, which allowed the group to continue even as individual members changed.
We've been meeting here
That's why their story is so important to this countdown. When you hear Kiss and Say Goodbye today, you probably remember Gerald Alston. But behind that famous voice was another man who had already written the heartbreak everyone was about to feel.
I'm gonna miss.
Sometimes, the person who creates the moment isn't the person the world remembers.
Take my handkerchief and wipe your eyes.
Number 5, Heatwave.
Dancing, keep on dancing.
Heatwave's story is much darker. Johnny Wilder Jr. became one of the voices associated with Boogie Nights and Always and Forever. But behind much of Heatwave's sound was songwriter Rod Temperton. Temperton wrote Always and Forever and later became one of the most important songwriters of Michael Jackson's career. Rock With You, Off the Wall, Thriller, but then tragedy struck Heatwave. Bassist Mario Mantiz suffered a devastating attack that left him severely disabled.
Ain't no doubt we are here to party.
Then Wilder was involved in a serious automobile accident that left him paralyzed from the neck down. The man whose voice helped define Heatwave could no longer perform on stage as he once had. Yet the music continued. Wilder continued contributing from the studio. Heatwave survived, and Temperton went on to create some of the biggest records in pop history. This isn't simply a story about replacing a singer. It's a story about a band refusing to disappear. Number 4, New Edition. By the mid-1980s, Bobby Brown was becoming impossible to ignore. He had the attitude, the swagger, the rebellious energy that made him stand out from the polished image of young R&B groups. But that same personality was creating serious tension inside New Edition.
She feels the same, she'll let you know. Just prepare yourself and be ready to go, man.
Eventually, Brown left the group. And then something extraordinary happened. He became a superstar. His album, Don't Be Cruel, turned him into one of the biggest R&B artists of the decade, producing massive hits like Every Little Step. From the outside, it looked simple. New Edition had lost its star, and the star had moved on to something bigger. But New Edition wasn't finished. The remaining members brought in Johnny Gill, and instead of trying to recreate the Bobby Brown era, they took the group in a more mature direction. Then came Heartbreak. Suddenly, New Edition was producing another generation of classic records. If It Isn't Love, Can You Stand the Rain? The album became one of the group's most successful releases, eventually going double platinum in the United States. And that's what makes New Edition's story so fascinating. Two things were true at the same time. Bobby Brown became a massive solo star, and New Edition became even stronger without him. Johnny Gill didn't replace Bobby by trying to become Bobby. He brought a completely different vocal style, and that changed the chemistry of the entire group. So maybe Bobby Brown really was the star, but he wasn't the entire machine. New Edition had been built by 5 young performers whose voices, personalities, choreography, and chemistry worked together. Remove one piece, and the machine didn't stop. It simply became a different machine. And that's why New Edition belongs this high on the list. Because sometimes, losing your biggest personality doesn't end the story. It creates the next chapter. Number 3, Kool the Gang. Here's something many casual listeners forget. Kool the Gang existed for years before James J.T. Taylor ever joined the group. The original lineup was rooted in funk, jazz, and instrumental music. They had already built a respected career, but by the late 1970s, the musical landscape was changing.
The city of the stars, movies, women, and cars.
Disco was dominating radio, and mainstream audiences were looking for stronger vocal personalities. Then came James J.T. Taylor. Taylor didn't create Kool the Gang, but he gave the group something it hadn't had in quite the same way. A recognizable frontman who could connect directly with the massive audience. Then came the hits, Ladies' Night, Too Hot, and eventually, Celebration. The song became the group's only Billboard Hot 100 #1 hit and grew into something much bigger than a chart record, a soundtrack for weddings, parties, sporting events, and celebrations everywhere. Then came Get Down on It, Joanna, and Cherish. The era most people remember when they hear Kool the Gang happened after Taylor joined. But here's the important part. Taylor didn't build the machine from scratch. The musicians had already spent years developing the group's sound and identity. The band built the engine. Taylor helped take it into the mainstream. And when he eventually left, Kool the Gang continued. Because once again, the group proved it was bigger than the person standing at the microphone. Number 2, The Miracles. Now imagine trying to replace Smokey Robinson, not just a singer, but one of Motown's greatest songwriters and the voice behind classics like Shop Around, The Tracks of My Tears, and Ooh Baby Baby. So when Robinson left the Miracles in the early 1970s, many people assumed the group was finished. Then came Billy Griffin. He was young, relatively unknown, and had grown up admiring Smokey Robinson. But instead of trying to imitate him, Griffin brought his own voice and songwriting style. Then came Love Machine. Griffin co-wrote the song, and it became the Miracles' second Billboard Hot 100 #1 and their biggest selling single. Think about that. Smokey Robinson leaves, and his replacement helps create the biggest selling record in the group's history. That's why the story is so remarkable. The Miracles didn't survive by pretending Smokey was still there. They survived by becoming something different. Smokey built the foundation. Billy Griffin proved the group could build another chapter on top of it. And that makes the Miracles one of the clearest examples of a group being bigger than the singer everyone associated with it.
Now, honey, that's quite a different subject.
Number 1, the Spinners.
To bow out gracefully.
And this is where the entire argument becomes almost impossible to ignore. The Spinners changed lead singers multiple times and kept making hits. One of their early defining records was It's a Shame, led by G.C. Cameron.
I'll be around.
But when the group moved from Motown to Atlantic, Cameron couldn't make the move with them because of his existing contract. So the Spinners needed another voice. Enter Felipe Wynne. Wynne didn't simply fill the vacancy. He became one of the defining voices of 1970s soul. I'll Be Around, Could It Be I'm Falling in Love, The Rubber Band Man. Suddenly, Wynne seemed inseparable from the Spinners, so when he eventually left, it would have been easy to assume the group's best days were over. Instead, they brought in John Edwards. Different voice, different personality, same group, and the hits continued.
Whenever you want me, I'll be there.
The Edwards lineup eventually scored another major success with Working My Way Back to You, Forgive Me Girl, proving once again that the Spinners could reinvent themselves without losing their identity. And that's what makes their story so remarkable. G.C. Cameron, Felipe Wynne, John Edwards, 3 different lead singers, yet the same group continued producing records that audiences remembered. If the lead singer were the entire product, changing voices repeatedly should have destroyed the Spinners. It didn't, because underneath the singer were the harmonies, arrangements, musicians, songwriting, production, and chemistry that made the Spinners who they were. The lead singer was important, but the group was bigger. The voice could change. The identity remained.
Whenever you call me,
And that's why the Spinners take the #1 spot. They didn't prove that the lead singer didn't matter. They proved something much more powerful. No single singer was bigger than the machine that made the Spinners.
though you hold the key.
Now I want to hear from you. Which story surprised you the most? Was it Smokey Robinson leaving the Miracles, Bobby Brown leaving New Edition, the incredible story of Heatwave, or the Spinners surviving multiple lead singers? And here's the question. Which R&B group do you think had the most irreplaceable lead singer? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you enjoy discovering the stories behind the voices, subscribe to Legacy in Stereo. Because we're not just listening to the old records, we're uncovering the people, stories, and decisions that made those records legendary. This is Legacy in Stereo. And sometimes, the person holding the microphone isn't the whole story.